Hello and welcome to another quick demonstration of some of the capabilities of the ArcSight ESM real-time correlation platform. Now today I'm actually going to look at something that's called ArcSight Interactive Discovery. I'm just loading it up now and I just want to, as I'm talking about it, explain what it does. So I'm actually going to load some data. It's not a huge amount of data, but I want to use this as a demonstration of the capabilities of what we have as part of this interactive discovery application. It's actually licensed from a company called Advisor, but it's been optimized and tuned specifically around the content and the data that would feed it in from an ArcSight ESM environment. Specifically, it's using categorized and normalized data, and it's got some relevance and understanding of what the schema is. So we can display some relevant visualizations to help us as part of the investigation process around seeing what's actually going on with our environment. Now, what we're doing is we're actually importing some data there. Like I say, it's not a huge amount of data, but we can see in this particular view, we're actually looking at what we call service access. This is a standard set and configuration of the views that have been configured, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a second. But we can see that there are a number of attackers involved, there's a number of target ports, and we've actually got some categorization in here as well, and it understands what that categorization is. So in this case, we have it by business role, and we can see that there's a number of aspects here. We're actually going to dig in on the revenue generation, but we'll look at that in a second. Of course, we can look at this by endpoint. We can see the parabox of what's talking to which here. We can do it by aggregation on the zones that we have. We can do it by port. It's a scatter plot. It's not particularly useful at this point because I don't have that much data in there. I can look at my overall parabox, so I can see combination of name of what the event is, attacker address and port, again targeted against the target, port and address, and then some category type data with some priority information as well. As you can see, the lines are everywhere, and for us to try and make an understanding of what's actually going on would be extremely difficult. We could, of course, look at this by category, so we can break it down by the category of the event itself, or try and do some sort of scatter plot. Again, I'm looking at a restricted set of data here just to show this. We can look at the events themselves, and we can scatter that out. Just as a note here, I'm using replay data effectively, which goes in at a very regular interval into the system itself. So a lot of these scatter plots won't exactly work on a demo environment. It needs to be irregular in a real world environment for a lot of these to work. But let me just jump back to my service access here. So we've got attacker and target address. We've got a lot of things going on. There's some things that look a little bit unusual, but we'll dig into those. We've got to start somewhere with our investigation. We've got to break this down by something logical. And starting at an IP address and doing some searching, for example, of trying to understand what's going on is not actually going to help us. We need to understand context. We need to understand relevance. And one of those contexts will be, for example, to look at some categorization we've got applied. So, for example, we can look at revenue generation. Now, the way that this system works is we just click through the data. So if I look at revenue generation, I just click it, it highlights it. More importantly, it highlights it across the other views that we have here. We've still got the other lines hidden. They are there, but we're actually showing the relevance here. Of course, if I jump back to my endpoints a second, it's updated all this too. So it's showing my relevance of my endpoints, both attacker and target, of which combinations are talking together with regards to what has this particular aspect. Now, what we could do is we can actually remove some of this. So I'm going to exclude unselected. What that means is it removes everything else that's unselected as part of this view. So we can actually just zoom in on that effectively. Now, notice how quickly it did it. This isn't sped up for a demonstration. It has this data and it's manipulating the data in memory. So it's doing that, and as we can see it. So suddenly we can start drilling through the data. Now, what's starting to jump out here is there are some very obvious IP addresses talking together here. We've got some external address ranges, we've got some internal address ranges, we've got some ports that are in communications. Now, what we could do is we want to start drilling into this data and understanding what's relevant. Now, for example, I'm aware from a context point of view, I'm aware that I know on port 22 and 53 and 80 that I'm actually okay. We've got some defined applications. We've got a web application firewall, for example. So what I can do is I can just highlight those particular ones. It highlights them, as I would expect. And what we can do here is we can actually exclude these now. So I can exclude the selected items. So I take those from a view, and suddenly it starts shrinking down a little bit further. But again, we're still seeing some relevance here. We're still seeing some data here, and we're trying to understand what's going on. So okay, let's not worry about this. Let's jump to my overall parabox view. Okay, so if you remember a second ago, this was very complicated and probably far too complicated for us to understand. But now we've got a much reduced list of events that we're seeing, the names of the events. We've got a different set of view with regards to the attacker and target. And we're starting to see some of this categorization. Now, of course, the coloring scheme is critical as well. Again, understanding the context of the data I'm looking at here. So the coloring is relevant because this is ArcSight data and it's colored accordingly. So red, bright in the dark red, that's priority 10, and it's actually scored this accordingly. So in this case, we've got the data from ESM, we're looking at this, and from a contextual relevance of the data, it's understood that this is a priority 10 set of events. Now, this is probably to do with a set of correlations, to do with some escalations, and probably to do with the sequencing and relevance of the events with regards to vulnerability data too. So it's scored this as a 10. So this is actually starting to get really important. Of course, actually, what we could do is I could just highlight that. Suddenly, we're starting to see some relevance here. Now we're starting to see that there are a limited set of IP addresses that are talking together, and we can start to see some of the categorization that's been applied, the relevance of the data here. So we can see that there is an attempt, a hostile, oh, crikey, we see a brute force here. So clearly there's been some relevance here about what's going on. But okay, what I could do is let's just jump back a second. Let's not get carried away. We can actually just go back a second to where we were. Let's carry on with our investigation just a little bit further around the endpoints that are involved. So we're actually now looking at this on endpoints. We can see there are some things talking together, but it's relatively irrelevant here. What I can see, though, is I can see that these three addresses here, all internal address range, so 10.0, and we can see this address here, again, 10.0, are somehow talking together. That's the things we probably want to dig into. Why are these machines talking? Again, I've probably got some additional context around the relevance of these with regards to my revenue generating systems. These external addresses that are talking together, I probably want to dig into those, but I'll dig into those later as part of my investigation. I really want to dig into these and what's relevant. So again, I click, I highlight, and let's exclude unselected elements here. So let's just focus in on those. Now, from a view of this, it becomes very simple. But when I look at my Parabox, suddenly I have a very restricted view of what's going on. Now I can see there's a number of things that are occurring. I can see the actual names of the events. So I can see some things targeting Oracle here. I can see that there's some relevance around some triggered compliance rules that I have. So targeting Sarbanes-Oxley regulated systems, targeting some other systems, GLB targeted as there. We can see attack from suspicious source. We can see some asset information there and a probable successful attack. That's now starting to get relevant, and now we can see we're going through. This starts to get irrelevant now because we can see target port is 1521. Oh, that'll be SQLnet, which is relevant to the Oracle side of things. And we can see the other destination machines. There's an attempt to exploit a vulnerability. There's a success and some sort of brute force in here as well. Suddenly, I've gone from a very wide spread view, and I've just through a few clicks managed to dig into the data, looking at the context of what that means. Of course, this is all still relevant to what I'm trying to do with regards to my service aspects, because I'm just looking at revenue generation. I'm just looking at those relevant machines. And of course, I can understand, jumping back to with relevance to the actual Parabox view here as well. So I can see there's a lot going on. So I can understand that these are machines that have been targeted. This is probably a relevant attacker. So actually, I probably want to dig into this a little bit further. So what I probably want to do is dig in a little bit more with regards to this machine, because it's clearly an attacker and it's doing a bit of a coordinated attack against these machines using Oracle of some sort of vulnerability and a weak configuration to try and get it. Looked at this with regards to revenue generating systems. So we probably want to drill out a little bit to try and see what's going on. Now, this is demonstration data, so it's not actually going to show me a huge amount here, but of course what I could do is I can actually go back out. So let's just exclude one of the original parts of the investigation that we had here. So we're excluding that preset drill down effectively on the revenue generation side of things. So I'm actually going to restore that back, and it puts it back to the original chart. So now that's what would have been it as part of that selection previously. So we can see the relevance here. We can see that a lot of these systems are targeting with regards to that. If I jump back to my power box view, we can see how complicated this was in the start off. Now, what I want to do is I probably want to go back and now I've got a starting point. Now I've got some relevant information. Now I've got this IP address here. I've got some destination machines as well that have been targeted as well. Those are my relevant data, and I need to start digging into those. I probably want to start searching around who's communicating to this 10.0.111.28 address and understanding who's accessed it and what's the wider context of what we're seeing here. So it gives me a starting point from an investigation. Now, I've actually derived that just by going through some very simple investigation process using the ArcSight interactive discovery capability by allowing me to display the context, the relevance, and that overlaying with the data and just going backwards and forwards. I'm able to identify that. If I just had the data, and of course you can just see this in gray here, if I just had the data, I wouldn't know where to start. I would have probably started, I don't know, from something that looked relatively interesting from a name point of view, that I probably wouldn't understood the overall context and the machines that are involved, and that it was targeting SQLnet specifically. I probably would have got there, but it would have taken me a lot longer instead of using ArcSight Interactive Discovery. So it gives you a view of how we can address this and how we can use something like this, a very simple, very straightforward data visualization tool to address some of this capability. Anyway, that's a very quick run through of ArcSight Interactive Discovery. I hope it was useful, and thank you very much for your time.